When traveling by plane, all of us at some point, even if it's hard to admit, have had that brief thought, what if this is the plane that crashes? Nah, I don't think so, right? But still, that tiny little doubt stays in your head. What if it does? Alright, well in today's video, I'm really gonna show you what the odds are of you having a plane accident, and how to know which airlines you shouldn't trust. That way, next time you travel, will you feel more at ease or not? Well, before we start, let me ask you, do you know when something is considered an accident? Well, it's defined as follows, and I'll summarize it for you. If someone on the plane suffers fatal or very serious injuries as a result of a hard blow or an explosion, that will be considered an accident. Or also, if the aircraft suffers structural damage that requires major repairs, it will also be considered an accident if the plane disappears or is completely inaccessible. And an incident is any unforeseen event that is not serious enough to fall into the category of an accident. Remember, this definition applies to the statistics we'll see later. An event in which a forced landing causes the death of a passenger will be considered an accident because there was a fatality. So, now comes the question, what is the probability of having a plane accident? To start, we must analyze several points. The first is the few years aviation has had to improve since commercial aviation developed as we know it today. After the Second World War, starting from the year 1945, about 75 years ago more or less, over the past 75 years, technology has advanced exponentially, leading to significant improvements in safety. For example, in this graph, accidents per million flights are represented. As shown, the likelihood of accidents was already minimal in 1970. 6 accidents per million flights. Well, right now, in 2021, there are less than 1 accident per million flights. And I guess that if this video is played in 40 years, the probability will be much lower. You also have to keep in mind that people are flying more and more, so there will be more accidents in total each year. It's like if I ask you, where would you prefer to fly? In a universe where there are 2 accidents for every 4 flights, or in a universe where there are 3 accidents for every 30 flights? Obviously, you would choose the second case, since even though there are more total accidents, the statistics show that it's much safer. Well, we're heading toward a point where that's exactly what's going to happen. But it's interesting to compare the chances of dying in a plane crash with those of other means of transportation. This graph compares the number of deaths among the main means of transportation per trillion miles traveled. Follow the same steps from the previous video about car accidents. As we can see, the most dangerous vehicle by far is the motorcycle with 212 deaths, followed by the car. And at the very bottom we have the airplane with 007 deaths. As I was saying, the probability nowadays is about 1 airplane accident for every million flights. It's much more likely, for example, that you'll die by drowning or even by poisoning yourself from eating something spoiled. So, as you can see, yes, aviation is very safe, but there's a dark reason behind this. If a plane has an accident in mid-flight, it's very likely that most of its occupants won't make it out alive. This is precisely why aviation is so safe, because everything is done with the idea that we can't allow failure, and right from the very first moment of design, everything is done with that in mind. Then we have manufacturing, operation, and maintenance, and all of those follow the same line. This is easy to understand, since if something fails on a bus or a train, there's a possibility to stop in a controlled way. If something fails on a plane, flying at 10-kilometer altitude and 800 km/h, it's very likely to end badly. Something that is widely used in aviation is redundancy. Everything is duplicated or even triplicated. Literally, the first mistake would be loading less fuel than necessary. If the person who then has to check the fuel doesn't notice, that would be the next mistake lined up. Most likely, the pilot would realize there's not enough fuel when checking the engine indicators, detecting the problem. However, if the engine indicators happen to be broken, it would be like adding another little hole, and so on, until several of these line up, and it ends up causing an accident, so failures would have to occur from the mechanics to the airline operators, and then finally, the pilot. It's hard to accept that aviation's safety is due to past accidents. The sector learns the most from its history. I'll show you 3 famous accidents, explain what went wrong, and what was learned from them. The first of them was an accident in which a D-Doc C-10 from United Airlines experienced a catastrophic failure of the central engine mounted in the tail. The engine explosion caused the loss of all 3 hydraulic systems that gave the pilot control over the tail stabilizers. After the explosion, there were serious difficulties in controlling the plane. He had to make an emergency landing where out of the 285 passengers, 110 died. This accident exemplifies a design error where redundancy was considered. They installed 3 hydraulic systems, all passing through the same location. A critical point that, if it breaks, causes a catastrophic failure. Nowadays, thanks to the fact that this has already happened, it's studied so that it doesn't happen again. The next accident was in 2008, tragically familiar to most of us. And McDonnell Douglas, 82 from Spanair, crashed after takeoff at Madrid Airport. The pilots lost control of the aircraft as a result of a stall immediately after takeoff because they did not set the flaps correctly. This serious mistake happened as a result of the pilot's failure to perform checks before takeoff. And to this was added the failure of a warning system, an alarm that should have specifically warned that the flaps were not lowered. Consequently, 154 out of the 172 passengers died. The plane crashed into a field inside the airport because, literally, it didn't have enough lift to fly. In this accident, you can see how important checks and redundancy and procedures are, as well as the warning systems on the plane. Imagine an airline that doesn't do the proper checks before takeoff, along with alarms that don't work. If something fails, on the day it goes wrong, you won't know it, and that's what happened. Let's say that with their negligence, they were making that accident very likely. And finally, we have this accident known as the Los Rodeos disaster, the worst accident in history that happened in Tenerife. In 1977, where 2 Boeing 747s collided when one of them was about to take off. The main causes of the accident were, first of all, the dense fog that completely blocked visibility, the failures in communication between the pilots and the controllers, and the human factors that led one of the pilots to decide to take off under uncertain conditions. Out of the 644 occupants, only 61 survived, making it the deadliest air accident in history. In this accident, what happened was that the control tower told the pilot to wait before taking off. The pilot only heard take off because of interference. If there hadn't been any fog, the pilot wouldn't have accelerated as he would have seen the other plane in the middle of the runway. Due to the fog, he couldn't see it and chose to accelerate. Since then, in communications, that word can't be used until the exact moment takeoff is approved. In that case, the controller would have said, "Hold short," and that way the pilot would never hear the keyword, until the moment when he actually has clearance for it. About this accident, I already made a video some time ago where I explained step by step what happened. Of course, any accident is unfortunate, but from an engineering point of view, accidents are always taken as a learning experience so that they never happen again for the same reason. That's the main reason why airplanes are so safe, because of the number of fatalities they have behind them, just so you get the idea. When an accident happens, 2 parallel investigations are opened, a legal one, which is in charge of finding who is responsible, and an aeronautical one, which only focuses on finding what went wrong to prevent it in future cases. Interestingly, there's a statistic grouping accidents by the flight phase in which they occurred. Around 10% of accidents happen during takeoff and the initial phases of flight. About 40% happen during cruise and 50% during approach and landing. A plane cruises at 800 km/h at an altitude of 10 km, so the accidents that happen there are almost always catastrophic. However, during takeoff and landing, we've seen that more than half of the accidents happen at this time. The plane isn't going very fast and is flying low, so it can attempt an emergency landing and prevent most of the passengers from dying. I'll teach you that next, but first let me mention another important point. A plane spends hours and hours flying at cruising speed while landing and takeoff happen in just a few minutes. After accumulating many hours of cruising flight, there's a higher chance of something going wrong. However, cruising is undoubtedly the safest part of the flight. It makes sense since the plane is far from the ground or other obstacles and is flying at a constant, stable speed. During takeoff or landing, the plane is near the ground at low speed. As seen in the video about firefighting planes, flying at low speed and low altitude is the most dangerous thing. Look, let me show you the list of all recorded airplane accidents. In 2019, 4 out of 15 accidents occurred due to planes overshooting the runway during landing. 1 was due to an attempted hijacking. 5 happened during takeoff, where 3 of them were due to engine failure, and in 1 of them, the engine broke after hitting birds. This one is the Ethiopian Boeing 737 MAX, and this one is from de Havilland. It broke up in mid-air, the one from Ukraine ran out of fuel, and the others happened during approach. As you can see, in all of them, absolutely all of them, very strange things have happened. For instance, the Boeing 737 MAX used a system that was evidently malfunctioning, yet still got certified as safe. In this case, the story would change starting from this and the next accident they had with Ethiopian Airlines, since it was, without a doubt, a scandal on the part of the authorities, and this will lead to the creation of processes to prevent this from happening again. In Bangladesh, there was an unusual attempted hijacking, and several exceptional events occurred in other cases. Anyway, something I want to mention is that air safety depends a lot on which country you are flying in. Flying on a Spanish national airline is not as safe as flying on a Venezuelan one. The following list shows countries with the highest number of fatalities from plane accidents. If you look closely, the United States is the one with the highest number of deaths. Consider the number of flights and planes each country has when making comparisons. If we adjust each country with this data, the list is sorted more or less as you would expect. And we can see the big difference between Europe and North America compared to other parts of the world. Friends and family often ask me about the safety of flying with Ryanair or low-cost airlines. And what I tell them is to follow this general rule. If the airline has flights to Europe or North America, it will definitely be an airline that meets acceptable safety standards. Otherwise, European Union Aviation Safety Agency, Europe, and FAA, North America Aviation Authorities would not have allowed that airline to fly over their territory. Going back to the Ryanair question, I definitely wouldn't worry at all. Now, it's a very different story with low-cost airlines that fly between African or Asian countries. In that case, I would be very cautious as safety standards differ from Europe. It's not just my opinion. The Data and International Air Transport Association document confirmed that the number of jet planes that crashed between 2016 and 2020 aligns with previous findings, where the global average is 0.2 planes per million flights. However, in Africa, it's 0.28, and in Asia, 0.34, both higher than the global average, while Europe and North America are well below. But are propeller planes more concerning? In Africa, the rate is extremely high, being almost 5 times higher than the global average. So, take my advice as a general guideline when traveling to such destinations. Since an airline like Ethiopian, even though it's African, covers flights to Europe daily, its standards will undoubtedly be European. If you think about it, in the year 2020, the vast majority of airplanes have been grounded for a long period of time, even months, and this is something that had never happened before. While it's true that when a plane undergoes major repairs, it does stay grounded for a month. What's different this time is that all the airplanes have been grounded at the same time. And let's hope that this new situation doesn't cause any future accidents. But if that were the case, would we have learned for the next time that all the airplanes have to be grounded at the same time? Remember, prior to the Los Rodeos accident, the aviation industry believed communication processes were flawless. Or before the DC-10 accident, they believed 3 hydraulic systems provided sufficient redundancy, but it became apparent that it wasn't flawless. Let's hope the same thing doesn't happen to us with aircraft maintenance on the ground. Well, after watching this video, you can now fly knowing how unlikely it is for something to happen to your plane. If you want to learn about all the maintenance processes and the rigor involved in the daily life of aeronautics, I'll leave a link here to a talk I had with Miguel Herranz, a maintenance worker for the Airbus A330, A340, and A350. I was surprised by what he told me. See you next time, and please subscribe for more videos like this.